Okay, gewaltig. So on Friday, we had an interesting Gemara about where does hair grow from? And the Gemara said the best way to know where hair grows from is to look at somebody who colors their hair. After a day or so, look at their hair roots. And if they're still gray, if they become gray, you know for sure the hair grows from the head out. And that was the maskana of the Gemara. The nafkamina was, if Listim cut his hair and only left a little bit, we say that the hair that was there when he was Makabal Naziris was cut off. And therefore, it was Soichus Naziris, he's going to have to let his hair grow again before he can take a haircut. What I want to focus on is what we learned at the end, and that is the rule of tar. That a Nazir is prohibited from cutting his hair, is it cutting it with anything, with any instrument, or is it only cutting it with a tar? So the Gemara was analyzing a pasuk. The pasuk says, if I could find it here, it says, Kol Yemei Neder Nizroi Tar Lo Yavar Al Roshai. So at first glance, that would seem that the only isser for a Nazir to cut his hair is if he uses a tar, which is a razor blade. But Reb Yoshio told us that since it says Kodesh Yeh Gadel Be'er Roshai, that says he has to grow his hair no matter what. He shouldn't be getting rid of his hair no matter what type of instrument he uses. And therefore, Reb Yoshio learns that the lav is for a Nazir to cut his hair no matter what type of instrument he uses. So then why does the pasuk specify tar? So Reb Yoshia, the reason why the pasuk specified the word tar is not to tell you about what you're prohibited from cutting your hair with while you're a Nazir. Rather, the pasuk is telling you at the end of the Naziris, as part of the discharge process, you have to cut your hair. There you have to cut your hair in a very specific way, only with a tar. And the way he'll read the pasuk is, a tar shouldn't be on your hair until your Naziris is over. But once your Naziris is over, it's the tar specifically that you have to use to cut your hair with. But Kadosh Yeh Gedol Peres HaRoshai is allowed to cut your hair while you're a Nazir with any instrument. That is how Rabbi Yoshia learned. And then we had Reb Yonasan who said, no, since the Torah specifies tar, the only instrument that would trigger a lav for a Nazir to cut his hair with would be a tar. And if a Nazir cut his hair in any other way, he would not be Chayiv Malchus. He would not be being over the lav. And then, as we moved on to Daf Mem Amar Aleph, which I will change to now, the Gemara brought the Shita of Rebbe, who said, unlike what we've just said in Reb Yonasan, that the word tar is only referring to the cutting of the Nazir's hair after he's finished up being a Nazir, rather it's also referring to the prohibition for a Nazir to cut his hair while he is a Nazir. And Rebbe said that it teaches you that, sure, any method with which you cut your hair as a Nazir, you'll be over a lav. But if you use a tar, then you'll be over 2 lav. So that is the maskana of what we learned on Friday. There's 3 approaches. Only according to Reb Yonasan do you say that a Nazir can cut his hair with any other method except for a tar. But Reb Yoshia, whether you learn like Rebbe or not, any way with which a Nazir cuts his hair is a prohibition. And the limud is that if when he's coming to cut his hair at the end, he can only use a tar to cut his hair. And the only question is there a second lav that's referring specifically to tar if a Nazir cuts his hair with a tar? Rebbe Yol, there will be 2 lavin because it specifies tar. Perfect. The only other thing I need to point out, which I forgot to point out before we turn the daf over, is the Gemara was looking for makar that Nazir has to cut his hair with a tar. The Gemara suggested on Amud Beis and I'm going to go back there because we have to look at that. The Gemara suggested on Amud Beis, maybe we should learn it out of Metzora. Right at the bottom of Amud Beis, the Gemara suggested maybe the source for the fact that when the Nazir cuts his hair, he needs to use a tar, maybe the source is from Metzora. By definition, if the source of that is from Metzora, it must mean that Metzora has an independent source not related to Nazir. Because if I told you that the only way we know that a Metzora uses a tar to cut his hair is from Nazir, then this Gemara wouldn't make sense. Because this Gemara wanted to suggest, it was only a Havamina, but nevertheless, the Gemara wanted to suggest that the way we know that a Nazir needs to use a tar when he's finishing off his Naziris is from Metzora. So clearly from this Gemara, there will be an independent source by Metzora to tell us that when Metzora cuts his hair, at the process of Taharis HaMetzora, he must use a tar. And that's going to come into play very, very soon. So now let's get back to Daf Mem Amud Aleph, and we'll start learning the Daf. Dr. Halevi Gemara. We are up to Amar Rav Chisda. So we're 6 lines from the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Chisda. Lilakos. How many hairs does one have to cut to violate the Isser of a Nazir cutting his hair? 1 hair. If a Nazir cuts merely one of his hairs, he gets malchus. La'akev. What happens at the end of his Naziris where he has to shave off all his head? What if he missed some? Zok Reb Chisda la'akev b'shtayim. If he only missed 1 hair, the giluach is good for the termination of his Naziris. If he missed 2 hairs, he's got to cut them. Listar, what about to say that now he has to count again because his hair is too short to do giluach? Einay soiser el beroiv rosh. Unless roiv of his hair was cut, he does not have to count more days, whether it's 7 days or 30 days. He doesn't have to count more days. So a lavi's over if he even cuts 1 hair. But to force him to wait till his hair grows again, that you don't need to do unless roiv of his hair was cut. Then Reb Chisda adds 1 word, ubetar. This only works with a tar. Tosfos learns that it's going back on the lakos. You only get malchus if you use a tar, which would be consistent with what we learned from Reb Yonasan. You only get malchus if you use a tar to cut the hair. The Rosh learns uvetar is referring to all of these halachas, even stira, even lakif. So Zok the Gemara, let's analyze what Reb Chisda said. Betar in the midi achrina loy. The only thing that he can use that would get him malchus, the only thing that would net him malchus if he cut his hair would be if it was cut with a razor. But if he cut his hair with any other instrument, he would not be chayim malchus. Frek the Gemara, how could you say that? We have a brisa that contradicts this. Bakatani minayin lerabos es kol hamavirin. How do you know that no matter what instrument you use to cut your hair, or to be more specific, no matter what instrument a Nazir uses to cut his hair, he will still get malchus. So how could you, Rav Chisda, say that you only get malchus if you use a tar? We have a brisa that says anything you use to remove the hair will get you a chiyuv malchus, which is like we learned from Reb Yoshia. Elo ema ka'en tar. Say what the Chisda meant is not that you have to actually use a razor. Rather, you have to remove the hair, and it should be a removal similar to that of a razor. Just like a razor removes it completely and leaves no stubble, so too you could remove it in any other way. But you have to be completely removed. There can't be any stubble, otherwise there would not be a chiyuv lav triggered, which is very consistent with what we learned from Reb Yoshia, that no matter what type of instrument you use as a nazir to cut your hair, it'll be chayv malchus as long as it was a clean cut, close cut. Tanya Nami Hachi, we have another brisa that supports this halacha. Nazir shetalash mirat sifseif kolsahu, a nazir that plucked hair or snapped hair with the different ways of plucking it with tweezers. Kolshu, even if he just took out 1 hair, chayev. The nazir is going to be chayev. So this is supporting the fact that you're chayiv malchus, even though you didn't use a tar. Einay soiser. When is it soiser that now he has to count again 30 days? So to Gemara, el beroiv roishay, only if roiv of his hair was cut. Uvitar, and once again, in order to get malchus, you have to use a tar, which we of course know it means ke'entar. It has to be a complete close cut. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda argues, Mishum Reb Shimon in the name of Reb Shimon, Kishem Sheshtei Cyrus Ma'akvois Boy, just like if when you make giluach, if you left two over, it's not a good giluach. Tach Shtei Cyrus Cyrus Boy. So now we have a machlokes. Till now we said in order for him to have to count another 30 days or another 7 days, he has to cut roiv of his hair. Reb Shimon says no. If you even cut 2 hairs, you now have to wait another week or another 30 days, depending on who you hold. Tanan Hasan, we had a Mishnah. I believe it might be a Mishnah in Negoim, I think. Tanan Hasan, Shloisha Megalchin. There are 3 individuals who have a chiyuv to cut their hair. B'taglachas on mitzvah. And their taglachas is a mitzvah. Who are these 3 people? Nazir. We know a Nazir has to shave his head after his Naziris. Metzora. The Torah tells us that a Metzora, in the process of him being Metar himself, he has to shave off all his hair. Uleviim. And in Parshas Baloischa, when Moshe was setting up the Leviim, they all had to shave off all their hair. V'kulam, all of these 3 people, shegilchu shaloi besar, if they cut their hair off, but they didn't use the tar, they didn't use a razor blade, or they left over 2 hairs, like their giluach is not a good giluach. That's the Mishnah or the Brisa. I believe it's a Mishnah that we're going to be focusing on for the next little while. Omar Mar, Shloisha Megalchin B'Taglachos Mitzvah. More Pshita. There's a pasuk in the parsha of Nazir, in the parsha of Metzora, in the parsha of Leviim that says you need giluach. Do I need a Mishnah to just spit out a pasuk? Zok to Gemara, no. The Mishnah, in telling us this, is teaching us a special chiddush. Mao the tema, you might think mishum ivurei sarhu. The whole hakpada by Nazir, by Leviim, by Metzora is that there should be no hair, but not the method with which the hair is removed, and therefore afilu sach nasha. Even if you use that type of cream that burns your hair off, the one that smells really bad. I'm not sure if anyone's ever been exposed to it, but my roommate used to use it, and we have to evacuate the room a whole Erev Shabbos. Even if you use that, it would be good to be yoytze the mitzvah of giluach for the Nazir, for the Metzora, for the Levi. Kamash v'lon deloy, kamash v'lon, the brisa that says shloisha megalchin b'taglachas and mitzvah, kamash v'lon, that has to be a giluach with a tar. It can't just be hair removal. Electrolysis is not accepted. Let's have a look at the Mishnah. Nazir, Metzora, Uleviim. And what did the Gemara just tell us? That the reason why the Mishnah tells us this is to tell you that you have to use a tar and not cream. And then the Mishnah goes on. So how could you tell me that the finish of the first clause in the Mishnah is that it has to be b'dafka with a tar? That's exactly what the Mishnah says in the second half. This is Tosfos' kasha. So Tosfos says, if it wasn't for the extra clause of shloisha megalchin b'taglachos on mitzvah, you would have interpreted the seif of the Mishnah differently, and you would have said doesn't mean literally he didn't use a razor blade. It means he didn't remove the hair in a similar fashion to the razor blade, meaning he didn't do a close cut. So you could touch his pasuk. If you didn't do a close cut, then it's not a good giluach. But from the fact that the Tana is redundant to shloisha megalchin b'taglachos and mitzvah, there the Tana is telling us that it has to be an actual tar. Okay, gewaltig. Omar Mar. Mar said, Loisha Megalchin, and it's not Amar Mar, I believe it's a Mishnah. Amar Mar. Shloisha Megalchin. Oh, Reb Chaim, I'm sorry I'm not there. I couldn't get my car out. Shloisha Megalchin. 3 people have to cut their hair. V'tagla chasan mitzvah, and the geluch is a mitzvah. Chita. After the Gemara, I just said this Gemara. Even if you use a cream, Kamash liluy. Zok the Gemara Katani. We learned the second half of this Mishnah. Each one of these, if they made giluch without the tar, they weren't yoyt. In other words, there's a mitzvah deraisa that a nazir has to make his giluch dafka with a tar, a Metzora has to make his giluch dafka with a tar, and a Levi has to make his giluch dafka with a tar. So let's see. I understand how we know it has to be a tar. Siv tar lo yaver al roisha. We learned just on Omid base, whether you learn like Reb Yonasan, whether you learn like Reb Yoshia, the tar lo yaver al roisha we learned is referring to the giluach, that the giluach must be accomplished with a tar. The Gabi Levim, by Levim it says, Ve'haviru tar al kol b'soram. Once again, it's very clear in the pasuk that it has to be a tar. Ela Metzora, a Metzora, v'tar minolan. Where do you know that a Metzora makes giluch with a tar? Zok the Gemara, v'chitema teisim Levim. If you're going to say that, how do you know Metzora the giluch needs to be with a tar? Well, it's similar to the Levim. Ma Levim shekein tunin taglachas, vein taglachosin ela b'tar. Just like Levim ni taglachas, and we know that the rules of taglachas are with a tar, as the Torah tells us by Levim. Afani avi yesam Metzora shuton taglachas. We know the Metzora needs taglachas because it says in the Torah needs taglachas, but it doesn't say with what. So we'll say if you need taglachas by Metzora and you need taglachas by the Levim, and by the Levim we knew it was a tar, say by Metzora as well. Vein taglachos ela b'tar. So to Gemara, that wouldn't be a good makar, because there's a big difference between the Levim and Metzora. Ikal Amirfrach, Mal Levim, Shekein Tunin, Tenufa Begufa. Levim needed a very elaborate process. They actually had to lift up each Levi. They made Tenufa on each human being. That's enough. That's definitely an elaborate process. So if it's an elaborate process, you also have very specific rules. It needs to be a tar. But Metzora is a much simpler process. I remember Metzora, the liluy, where you don't lift up the Metzora. So who said the giluach of a Metzora should be the tar? Elazar to Gemara, taking Nazir, let's learn it from Nazir. So let's stop a second. We just learned on Amid Beis that there was a Havamina, the Gemara wanted to use Metzora as a source for Nazir. Here, the Mishnah is clearly saying that we want to use Nazir as a source for Metzora. That's impossible. We got to start somewhere. And this is the kasha that the Gemara is going to ask on Amud Beis. Here the Mishnah says clearly that we want to use Nazir as a source for Metzora. Yet, just on Lamed Tes Amud Beis at the bottom, the Gemara said maybe we should use Metzora as a source for Nazir. So we'll get back to that. Now we're still focusing here on how do you know that Metzora needs tar? And l'taisim Nazir. Maybe you learn it out of Nazir. Dr. Gemara, you can't learn it out of Nazir. Mal Nazir, shekein karbonai, hon lechem. A Nazir's carbon needs lechem. So once again, you see there's an elaborate process by Nazir. The carbon that needs lechem. That's why it also has specifics as per the giluach regarding that it needs to be a tar, requiring a tar. Timer b'mitzayir liluy. So because of that, you cannot learn Metzora from Levim alone, and you can't learn Metzora from Nazir alone. But maybe if Nazir and Levim team up, maybe then Metzora can learn it from both of them. Teisi mitarveim. So Mehei Teisi, where should we start our limud from? Teisi mi Levim. Let's start with Levim. You're going to ask, Mala Levim shekein tenufan begufan. For there I can say Nazir yachia, because Nazir doesn't need tenufan begufan. You're going to ask, Mala Nazir shekein karbonai ton lechem. For that I'll say Levim yachichu. They don't need lechem. The chadra adin, and now we have a memetzinu. Lo yiroi zeh karoi zeh. What common thread is there both by Nazir and Levium? That they need taglachas. V'taglachas on betar, and both the taglachas need a tar. So it teaches us that taglachas need to be betar. Afani obvious and Metzora to ton taglachas v'taglachas betar. So now this Mishnah is sort of concluding that the mikor of Metzora is Nazir, which is very schwer, because a moment ago we said that there would be a havamina that the mikor of Nazir is Metzora. Amalei Rava mibar nishler Ravashi. So as an aside, Rava is commenting on the Mishnah, and Rava has a kasha on the Mishnah. And Rava's kasha is, even from Nazir and Levium together, you still don't know Metzora, because there's something unique to Levium and Nazir that does not apply to Metzora. So therefore, maybe it's that factor that triggers the Chiyuv Tar, and maybe there's no Chiyuv Tar by the Metzora. The Livach the Gemara, Ma'ala Tzara Shava Shabehen. Levium and Nazir have a commonality. Shekain, Ein, let me turn the daf over. Shekain Ein Karbani Bedalis. By Metzora, there's a sliding scale depending on someone's financial status. He brings different sets of karbanos. But by Nazir and by Levium, it didn't matter what your status was, everyone brought a fixed carbon. So maybe if it's a more rigid structure, there you need tar. Timer b'Metzora, shekarbani b'dalos. How could you bring a raya from Nazir and Levium to Metzora? So that's an aside. It's a kasha on the Mishnah. There are ways that we could forever this kasha. One of the Rishonim offer a pshat that is it a kula? Is it less kadosh to bring a carbon that's a bird instead of a behemoth? So they say maybe Rava's kasha is not a good kasha. But let's put that aside. Omer le Rava bar Meshachal Rava. We have a problem. We have a schizophrenic situation over here. Hi Tana, this Tana, Meikara Omar lelam b'Metzora efsher shein donin kal mechamer lahachmer alof. First on Lamates Amid Beis, the Tana said that you cannot use Metzora as a makar to Nazir because Metzora is more chomer than Nazir. But that means that we have an independent source for Metzora. Hadar Amar, and now we just learned on Amar Aleph, Nelef Medina. Learn it out of a Mematzinu, out of a Tzara Shabbos, where Nazir is a very important component of that limud. And guess what? Umedina Namid Aleph. It didn't even work because Rav had a kasha. So now we have a stira. Is Nazir the makar for Metzora, or is Metzora the makar for Nazir? Amar le'ahu, Amar le'. So Rav answered back, Ahu alibu d'Rabbanan, ha alibu d'Rabbi Eliezer. Is actually machlokes. Who holds that Metzora has an independent source? The Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold that Metzora is an independent source, and that's what the Gemara was referring to at Lamed Testament Beis. Since Metzora has an independent source, maybe we should learn Nazir from Metzora. But on Amid Aleph, what we just learned, where we're using Nazir as a source for the Metzora, that's going according to Rabbi Eliezer. So in fact, there's going to be a machlokes how we know Nazir needs a tar, and there'll be a machlokes how we know Metzora needs a tar. And if you know it by Nazir, you can learn it from Metzora. If you know it by Metzora, you can learn it by Nazir. So now we're going to get down to the machlokes. We're not going to get through everything today, but we're going to at least get through the Rabbanan Shita, who learn that we know Metzora needs a tar from an independent source, not from Nazir. The Tanan we learned. And this is now talking about the prohibition for a Yid to shave his beard with a razor. The Einai Chayiv, someone who shaves his beard off, is not Chayiv alav, ad sheyitlanu. I think the Tziyonim, I don't have Tziyonim over here, but the Tziyonim change it to ad sheyitlanu. Ad sheyitlanu, betar, unless you took off your beard with a razor. Talking about Tziyonim, there was once a Satmar Shtibel. The Ruv is standing there in front of the Shtibel, and he sees in the back, there's two Yingalat that are shmising in the back. So he wants in the middle of davening. So he walked over to the middle of davening. He says, in the Satmar Yingalat, you're Satmar Yingalat. Who starts about the Koshel Amaruvi? A Satmana doesn't go to the Koshel. He starts about the Koshel Amaruvi. Come a little bit forward. The Ruv sucht ins Missir. The Ruv ganze Tug dreht sich mit dem Mizrach Hisken. You're on the Mizrach whole day. So sagt the Gemara, the Einay Chayiv Ache Yitlenu B'tar. The Tanakama holds that the iter of shaving is only to use a razor. Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, Afil Liktoi B'Malaket Uber Hitni Chayiv. You're Chayiv if you do a close shave. It doesn't make a difference if you cut it with a razor, if you pull it out with a tweezer, or if you use a rehitni. If you look at the art scroll, a rehitni is a plane, like a carpenter uses. That's not shaving. I would call that mutilation. But it gets the hair off. I'm sure it gets off everything too. But I'll call upon him. Reb Eliezer holds that any method that a person uses to shave off his beard, to eliminate his beard, would be chayiv, which would be scary. I don't think it's possible. Can you imagine if, like, you pulled out a hair from your beard? If you pulled out a hair, you get malchus? Can you imagine? Every time I open up a Gemara, I could see 30 people who are chayiv malchus. Maybe it would be a good thing. So Zok the Gemara, Ablezer, I feel likely been malaki the Ritni chayiv. Correct the Gemara, my time I do Rabban. So the Tosfos explains we're not looking for the svara why the Rabban holds ve'in chayiv achi l'knei b'tar. What we're looking for is how do you see from the Rabbanon what we're looking for, that Metzora has its own source that you need a tar. So you just told me a tar tahu only with the Rabbanon, not according to the Rabbanon. Metzora, independently requires a tar. How do you see from a machlokes about someone shaving his beard that has nothing whatsoever to do with Metzora? How do you see from there that a Metzora needs to cut his hair with a tar? Zokir Gemara, it's a little bit of a roundabout cheshbon. So let's go through this cheshbon. The Tanya we learned. It says by a Nazir, it says by a Metzora that he has to shave off his whole hair. So let me see if I can find a pasuk somewhere here on the side of this daf here. So here it says, on the seventh day of the Tahira process of this Metzora, Yigalach as kol sa'ari. The Metzora, the healed Metzora, has to cut off all his hair. If it says in the pasuk cut off all his hair, would you agree that means the hair of his head? Of course. Would you agree it means the hair of his beard? Yes. It means all his hair. Kol sa'ari is quite clear. Kol sa'ari. Yet, after the Torah already included all of the hair on his body, the Torah saw a need to itemize this roishoi, this sakanoi, this gabis einov, this kol sa'ari galeh. So the kasha is, why did the Torah need to itemize roishoi, sakanoi, gabis einov if it already said kol sa'ari? So we're not going to focus now on roishoi. We're not going to focus on gabis einov. We're going to focus on zakan. So now let's look in the Gemara. Nani we learned zakenoi, his beard. That's one of the itemized things that a Metzora has to shave. Matam adleimer. Why did the Torah have to tell us to cut off his beard? Does it not already say it's kol sa'ari? The teretz is l'vishanemar. It says uparas zakonim lo yigalech. Kohen, no one's allowed to cut their beard. So let's just take a break for a second to analyze this prohibition for a kohen to cut his beard and it's for Yisrael to cut his beard. So it says in the pasuk, referring to a kohen, lo yikachu karcha b'rosham ufa'as zakonim lo yigalech. So the way the Torah expressed the prohibition of cutting a beard off to a kohen was the word lo yigalech. When the Torah was stating the prohibition for anybody to cut their beard, it says v'lo sashchis es pasuk anecha. It's called it hashchasa. Now there is a limud pa'as. What we learn from pa'as is whatever rules there are in the prohibition for a kohen to cut his beard, those same rules apply to Yisrael cutting his beard. And we're soon going to see, and that's the machlokes that we just quoted from Reb Yisroel Halevi. So we're soon going to see what that is. So let's go back here. Zakanai, the Metzora must cut his beard. Matam adleimer. Why does the Torah have to specify beard if we know we have to cut all his hair? There's a prohibition to cut your beard. You would have thought that there's a prohibition to cut your beard, so a Metzora would not cut his beard. Even though it says, not all of his hair. It excludes his beard. Now let's stop for a second. Is there not a rule? So why would I think that you wouldn't cut your beard? Yisrael, why would I think that a Metzora doesn't cut his beard? Because there's a loisasa of a pkas on loy galeichu. It's an assay of a Metzora. Assay doich loisasa. Zok toisvis. We're not referring to a Yisrael right now. We're referring to a kohen. By a kohen, it says ufasa kanam loy galeichu, but it also says kedoshim yiyu. And we know that even though Naseh is doicha loisasa, but Aseh is not doicha loisasa v'aseh. So therefore, Zaktoisvis, we're focusing now on the kohen. Yochel afilu Metzora kain. I would have thought that a Metzora, a kohen who's becoming tar, that kohen, although he would cut off all his hair, he would not cut off his beard because there's a loisasa v'aseh. Hamid loymar zekanoi. The Torah is saying by a Metzora, cut off his beard. Whose beard? A person who is a loisasa v'aseh, telling you not to cut off his beard, that guy, his beard you should cut off. So the Torah is using an extra word zekanoi to be very clear that even someone who would otherwise be prohibited from cutting off his beard. So very good, very nice. So we know that a Metzora will cut off his beard even though he's a kohen. And there's a loisasa v'aseh against it. When we know on the betar, now is our punchline. How do you know that what we're talking about when the Torah is telling the Metzora, cut your beard, cut it with a tar? How do we know that? So Gemara, that's a simple equation. The Tanya we learned, Upa'at l'kanim lo yigalech. That's the pasuk of the prohibition by a kohen. So giluach is not specific. Yochel afilu gilchai b'misparayim yechai. You would think that a kohen gets malchus for cutting his beard even with his scissors. Talmud loimer by the Yisrael v'loy sashkis. V'loy sashkis is pasuk onecha. And the background information that you need to know is from pa'as by kohen to pa'as by Yisrael, we learned that they have the same halacha. So we have a lashon of lo yigalechu by the kohen. We have a lashon of lo sashkis by the Yisrael. Well, if you look at lo sashkis alone, then yochel liktoy b'milkut overhitni yechai. You would think that even if I destroyed my beard, not with a tar, I pulled it out any other way, you'd also be chayiv, because that's also hashchasa. By the kohen says lo yigalechu. So in order to trigger a lav, you need two factors, giluach and hashchasa. There's only one way to get that. The only way you can have giluach that's also hashchasa is with a tar. So now that we know that the prohibition for a regular person to cut off his beard is only with a tar, and by Metzora, the Torah tells us specifically that although normally you wouldn't be able to cut your beard, but for Metzora, Zakana, do it anyway. It must be saying that for a Metzora, you need to use a tar. Because if I didn't need to use a tar, I can cut it any other way, then why would I need a special limud that you can cut your beard? You're not violating the issue. So it must be the issue is with a tar. And if the issue is with a tar, that we know, it must be that the chiyuv of Metzora is also with a tar, and there would be a conflict. And if it wasn't for the fact that it said zakanai, you wouldn't know that you should cut your beard with a tar if you're a kohen. But you see clearly that the chiyuv of giluch by the Metzora is only with a tar. So this is a very beautiful makar, and it's completely independent of Nazir. So on Lamed Tes Amud Beis, when the Gemara said Yalaf Metzora, learn Nazir from Metzora. How do I know Metzora? I know Metzora because it says the kanai, and if I need the Torah to tell me that you're allowed to cut your beard, it must be that it would have otherwise been usher. What would have otherwise been usher? Only cutting it with a tar. Beautiful. Now we're going to have a zayte geshaita. Mimai, how could you claim that the fact that it says a kanai, it means that the only way to be mekayim the mitzvah of giluch by a Metzora is with a tar? Maybe you could be mekayim the mitzvah of giluch of a nazir anyway. It says a kanai to tell you that if you decided that you wanted to do it with a tar, which will conflict with the lav, you could do it anyway. Not that you have to do it that way. There's many ways to be mekayim giluch. The pasuk is telling you a chiddush that if you want to use this way, even though it would otherwise be usher, you're allowed to use it. But lav dafka, that's the only one that you could do. That's the Gemara's kashi. Mivai. Maybe the chiyuv of Metzora to do giluach is anyway. And the chiddush of Zakana is to tell you, it's just telling you that if you wanted to use a tar, you'd be able to use that as well. That is the Gemara's kasha. So we don't have a raya anymore that the only way to do giluach by Metzora is with a tar. Zok the Gemara, that's not logic. Amr isal kadaydach ki ovid nami b'malakad over hitni shaper dami. If you hold mina svara that any way that a Metzora cuts his hair, it's acceptable, then I wouldn't need the word zakanoi to tell me that you're even allowed to do it with a tar, even though it's violating an issue. I would have known that from a kal v'chomer. Lifter kramine, I don't need a pasuk to say zakanoi. Without any limud, I would have figured it out. Val na'amina, I would have said, umagabi nazir di surah. Madaka nazir, where the way the Naziris started was through an Isser, because we know being Mekabel upon your Naziris, yourself Naziris, is Nikri Chayte. So you got into this Lechatchila through an Isser. Nevertheless, the Yisur Kavid, Afilu Hachim Mechayiv, nevertheless, at the end of your Naziris, you could cut your hair with a tar, even though it's Asr. Haka, the mitzvah, by a Metzora, where there's a mitzvah from the Torah that a Metzora has to make iluach. He didn't bring the tzaras upon himself; it just came upon himself. Like surely there, the cutting with the tar should be doich. So Mati first asked, "What do you mean you didn't bring it upon yourself? Don't we know that speaking lashon hara brings tzaras upon yourself? But that's not really a kasha because you're really bringing it indirectly. You spoke Torah, you spoke lashon hara, so the Torah gave you tzaras. Naziris, your mamish being mekabel upon yourself." Now, this isn't such a good kasha. There's a lot of issues with it, as you can see from Tosfos commentary. But the Gemara is going to prove in another way that you cannot possibly say that Zakana is just telling you that you're allowed to use a tar. Zakana must be telling you that you can only use a tar. Why? And not, let's see the kasha on Amud Aleph. Zok the Gemara, Visu. Let's think about it. If you're going to tell me that technically you could be mekayim the mitzvah of giluach of a Metzora in many different ways, that would not violate the iser of loisashvis. And the chiddush is that you're just allowed to use a tar if you want to. That doesn't make sense after Gemara. You know why? Because Rish Lakish told us a rule that the only time you say asay doich loisaseh is if you have no other way to be mekayim dasei without avoiding the licensing. But if you can find any way to be mekayim dasei where you don't have to be over the licensing, you don't say asay dach licensing. So let's read this inside. Mitzvah kavid with the likes of tar. If it wouldn't have said tar, Rish Lakish, I would say like Rish Lakish. The Omar Paul Mokim Shata Moitzi Asay Veloisaseh Imata Yochal Kaim Eshnei Mutav. If you could be mekayim dasei without violating the leisha, avad it's not doichen because you're not contradictory. Bimlav, if there's no way you could be mekayim dasei without violating the leisha, so then and only then do we say yava yasei v'yitches leisha. So therefore, you cannot say that Sakanai by the parish of Metzora is telling you that you're allowed to make giluach anyway. And if you so decide that you want to use a prohibited method, that's also allowed. Because according to Rish Lakish, it's impossible that it would be allowed to use a prohibited method if there's an allowed method available. So it must be Zakana is telling you that you must use a tar. And there's no other way to be mekayim the mitzvah of giluch by Metzora other than using a tar. So you would think it won't be doichet the license and that say prohibiting a kohen to cut his beard. Kamashwan Zakana that it's doicha something that it would normally not be doicha. The say of giluach of the Metzora is doicha the loisa ve'asei. So the net result of what we've got is we have a shita of the Rabbanon who hold that Metzora has an independent raya that you megalech with a tar and only with a tar. Why? From the word zakanoi that's mentioned in the list of things that he has to cut. And with that, we could stop for today. And I wish you a good tavach. In the Mitcham, we will continue tomorrow morning at 7 and at 9.
Shkoyach. Good
Shkoyach, good tavach.